Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Movie Armaments Group in Toronto, where we are taking a look at a very unusual Polish personal defense weapon. Really, PDW is the best definition for this thing, because it's not quite a machine pistol, but it's not quite a submachine gun. In fact, even technologically speaking, mechanically speaking, it's kind of halfway between submachine gun and machine pistol. So it's a very interesting gun. This is the PM63 Rak, R-A-K. Now, we'll start with the name, because there's a really cool story behind the name. In Polish, that translates to cancer, which can mean two different things, either the disease or also the constellation. And there are two varying ideas, and they're probably both accurate, of why the gun was named this. The first one is Cancer, the constellation, is a person facing one direction but moving the other, walking backwards, so to speak. And the designer of this gun saw some interesting corollaries between how this pistol functioned, how this gun functioned, and the concept of walking backwards. At the same time, he was also diagnosed with terminal cancer while he was developing this gun. In fact, he would die before this pistol was actually adopted by the Polish military. And so apparently he was in a habit of telling people that while he was working on this thing, that either he would beat the cancer or the cancer would beat him. And if he beat the cancer, it would mean he had this thing finished before he passed away, which unfortunately he didn't. So anyway, that's why it's got this kind of odd name. The more militarily appropriate name would be either the PM63 or the WZ, Vzor Model 63 submachine guns. I think submachine gun or machine pistol. Anyway, this was the creation of a Polish gun designer by the name of Peter Wilnuczyk. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He had a fair amount of prior gun experience. He was the guy who designed the model of 1935 pistol, which we typically call the Radom here in the US. He was also the designer of the 1939 pattern Mors submachine gun in Poland. And what he did after the war, after Poland joined the Soviet bloc, he started working on a compact pistol in 9x18 Makarov. Now, his goal was to have this thing adopted by the Polish military, but ultimately he would lose out to a different team of designers who put together the gun that would eventually become the the P64 pistol. But he kept tinkering with this gun, and by the late 1950s, he was looking at this more as a select fire gun, inspired in part by the Stechkin in the Soviet Union, looking at how can he create basically a personal defense weapon, an intermediary between a pistol and a submachine gun. And what he came up with is a really interesting mechanical design, where you basically have an open bolt slide. So it's not a contained bolt like a submachine gun, it's a slide like an automatic pistol, but the slide fires from an open bolt. Let's take a look. Let me just show you how this works, because it's pretty cool. This is the fully extended and opened up, ready to shoot configuration of the gun. We can take the stock, rotate the butt plate in 270 degrees, push this little button, which allows us to rotate it in. And there we go, and we can slide the stock all the way in. The one thing that the butt plate does really nicely is slide into position here underneath the back end of the grip. So that brings this down much more to a pistol sort of configuration. We then have a button on the side of the front grip that allows this to be folded down, and now you have a very large pistol setup. The gun can, of course, be fired like this, and it was equipped, it was issued with a belt holster that held the gun in this configuration. So you can shoot it like this, can drop it down, and use this as a vertical front grip, either with the stock extended or retracted. This wasn't terribly popular with the guys who actually had to shoot these a lot, because this does loosen up, as you can see. Same thing with the stock. As with all such metal collapsing stocks, it will get quite wobbly over time. Now, the really unusual aspect is, of course, mechanically how this works. So this has a slide that cycles back and forth like that. I'm going to go ahead and take the magazine out, push button there, pull it out, and when I hold the trigger down, the slide, when you're firing, just goes back and forth like that. So It's really like a combination of a pistol slide and a submachine gun bolt. There's this big spoon-like deflector out here. It's not really a flash hider. It doesn't really act as a compensator. It's more of a hand protector. So if you're firing with the vertical front grip like this, that acts as, well, not so much there, but when you let it go forward, it acts as a protector for your hand. This also allows the gun to be cocked one-handed. So instead of having to grab it here and cock it, you can take it and push it against any flat surface to cock the gun. In theory, you could do it against your leg, but I wouldn't recommend that. There is a hold open tab on the follower here, right there. So this will lock open automatically when the magazine is empty. It won't let you, well, it always locks open because it's an open bolt gun, but when the magazine is empty, it will stop firing in the open position. So you just reload a new magazine and you're ready to fire again. One of the other interesting aspects to this, if you look closely here, you'll see that this feed lip is straight and this one has a step in it. That is because the back end of this feed lip is the ejector. The bolt has a slot in it for that bit of the left side feed lip, and the cartridge case is brought back here, hits right there, and is kicked out of the gun. Vilnuchik really liked that concept. Unfortunately, that required him to have a single feed magazine design, because otherwise it wouldn't work. The ejector can't be in two places at once. So that forced him to go back to this, early style of double stack single feed magazine, which is less desirable in many ways than the double feed magazines. It's certainly harder to load. This is the 15-round magazine, which sits flush in the gun's grip. So that's the one that is used when the gun is holstered. There is also a 25-round magazine made, which sticks out a ways below the gun. I mentioned that this has a progressive trigger. What I mean by that is if you pull the trigger partway, right here, it will fire, and when the slide opens up, it will lock open, and you have to let the trigger back and fire a second time. That's the semi-auto mode. When you pull it all the way back, then it will fire in full auto until you release the trigger. It is a little bit awkward shooting this because when you fire, you're starting here, the slide initially drops forward and then comes shooting right back at your face. There are legends, there are rumors, myths in the Polish military about people who had their eyeballs destroyed by this slide ramming into their eye. No stories like that have ever actually been verified. I'm sure it didn't happen. Some people did hit the slide on gas masks, for example, but you really have to crowd this gun a lot to have the slide hit you in the face. The stock is actually relatively long for this sort of machine pistol. Like if you compare this to a Scorpion stock, this is much longer, and that's done to make sure that you have adequate space for your face behind the slide. It also helps that the slide starts in the fully rearward position, so you don't have to guess about where it's coming from or coming to. Position your face with the gun locked open. When you start shooting, you just have to get used to that weird feeling, that weird sight of the bolt coming back at you very quickly. The rear sight is a two-position open notch, a 150-meter notch, and a 75-meter notch, in conjunction with a sort of a shark fin style of squared-off front post. We'll take a quick look at the markings, which are all here on the right side of the slide. Then we'll go ahead and take it apart. We have a date, we have a serial number, a British proof, because this particular gun came to Canada by way of England. And then that circle 11 is the Soviet bloc, the Eastern Bloc code designation for the Radom factory in Poland. I guess I should also point out there are some markings on the barrel. The caliber, British proofs, again, because this came through England, and the serial number. And we have the serial number again on the frame underneath the stock bars. Now, to take this apart, we are going to pull the slide back until the marking here lines up with the front notch there, and then we are going to engage the manual safety. If you push the slide back too far, you will actually cock the gun, so we want it right there. Engage the safety. That locks the slide in the not quite fully open position, and then we have to rotate the barrel. So this comes apart kind of like a Colt 1903 pistol. So I'm going to take the barrel. We've got serrations on the front so you can grasp it. I'm going to rotate it counterclockwise about 90 degrees. Once you've done that, then we can grab the slide, disengage the safety, and the whole slide will come forward. And we want to bring it to right there, and then lift it off. Once the slide is out, you can then rotate the barrel back and remove it like so. And that is pretty much all field stripped. Now there's a bunch more interesting stuff here in the gun. You'll notice I'm pulling the trigger here, and we have a sear bar there moving, and nothing in the back of the gun. That's because the sear engagement surface on this is right here below the muzzle. Since this whole slide is reciprocating, there's no need to have a sear notch back here like you would normally expect. Instead, you can put it right up in the front where it engages right there. So again, you can see when I click it, that's semi-auto. When you pull it all the way in, it drops, and it's just going to let this slide go back and forth until you release the trigger. There is a fixed firing pin in the face of the bolt there, and there's a slot right there on the side, which is where the magazine feed lip goes through to act as the ejector. Yeah, so there's the magazine feed lip protruding into the bolt face where it will kick the cartridge out. The barrel is fixed in place using locking lugs here like the Colt 1903, and they lock into the frame right there, like that. That's why you have to rotate the barrel to get them out. And then we have this really neat bit at the back, and this is a spring-loaded hook that is part of the rate reduction mechanism. So if this didn't have a rate reducer, it would fire it probably something at or a little above 1,000 rounds a minute. However, they wanted it slower. They wanted more like 600 to 650. So they put in this really ingenious rate reducer. Here in the slide, we have two weights. You can see those little sort of silver-colored weights there. The front one is tapered at the front. What happens is when you're shooting, the slide is going to slam all the way back, and when it gets to the end of travel, those weights, which have a spring behind them, are going to push backwards. When that happens, this hook is going to push up because it's under spring pressure, and it's going to lock into this little slot right here, and it's going to lock the slide into the back end of the receiver so that the gun stops moving, can't fire any further. These two weights are going to, just from the inertia, when they're going to keep moving when the slide hits end of travel and stops. So the weights are going to come all the way back like this, decelerate, start to come forward again, and because that front weight is tapered, when it gets here, it's going to push on this curved rear surface of the hook. It's going to push that hook down, which is going to release the slide, allow it to go forward, pick up another cartridge, and fire. So that should be really cool to see in high-speed video, watching the slide come to the back, stop, and then cycle forward. And that's how they kept the rate of fire down. Anyway, I left off early on the developmental history of this. Unfortunately, Vilnuchik died in 1960. His work was taken over by a couple of other engineers, and they're the ones who really pushed it the rest of the way to become the complete gun that you see here. It was formally adopted by the Poles in 1963, although it didn't actually go into production until 1967. It remained in production for 10 years. They made about 70,000 of them by 1977, when production finally ended. It was exported in small numbers, but not in huge numbers. There was an effort at one point made to create a 9x19 millimeter export version with a much heavier slide. That went nowhere. They ended up building basically 20 prototypes of it and nothing further. This did see service in the Polish military as it was intended for officers, for artillery crewmen, missile crewmen, guys who didn't need a full-size rifle but did need a personal firearm. So it never actually saw serious combat. A few of them have turned up here and there in various small-scale conflicts or in the hands of terrorist groups, but it was never actually used in open warfare, which maybe is a good thing. Guns like this don't ever seem to really work quite as well as people think they would, in terms of in the grand sense. They often work just great mechanically, but they don't really fill the role like they're intended to. So I have been very interested to actually get to shoot one of these for quite some time, and happily we are going to have the chance to do that tomorrow. So we're going to pack this up and head out to the range. A big thanks to Movie Armament Group for giving me the opportunity to show you this one and also take it out tomorrow to do some shooting with. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, definitely stick around for tomorrow's when we have this out at the range. Thanks for watching.